They say the desert never forgets, that under the heavy stillness of its golden silence, memories breathe quietly, patiently, like wind exhaled from the lungs of time. And if you listen closely, not with your ears, but with your dreaming self, you might hear it. A whisper, not quite a voice, not quite a song, but something older than either. Beneath the sands northeast of what we now call Cairo, there lies a place where the world once tilted toward the sun, not by accident, but by design. A city so ancient that even the pharaohs bowed before it. Before there were kings, before pyramids, before papyrus held words like cages, there was Yinu. We know it today by another name, Heliopolis, the city of the sun. But that name, Hellenized, distant, like something seen through the heat wave shimmer of history, cannot hold the weight of what it once meant. This was no ordinary city, no bustling trade center, no seat of empire. Heliopolis was a breath offered to the cosmos. Even now, archaeologists find it hard to define. Its ruins are shy, scattered stones, half-swallowed columns, sun-worn foundations too proud to beg for remembrance. Most of it is gone, yes, buried beneath asphalt and modern noise. And yet, the ground hums. There's a strange warmth in the earth here. Not heat from above, but something that seems to rise from within, as though the sun had once fallen into the soil and left a fragment of itself behind. Locals sometimes speak of it in hushed tones. Taxi drivers passing through the district speak of unease or oddly vivid dreams after driving past the obelisk, the last true sentinel of Yinu, still standing, still watching. But what was this city truly? To understand Heliopolis, you must forget the neat timelines and tidy museums. Let them go. Instead, close your eyes. Let your breath slow. Let your skin remember the warmth of sunrise on bare stone. Let your bones feel the hush before dawn, when the desert holds its breath and time forgets to move. That is where Heliopolis lives. It is not a city of men, but of moments. A place where myth and morning were twins, born together each day in a golden cradle of ritual. A city that did not merely observe the sun, but listened to it. Because you see, in Heliopolis, the sun wasn't just a god. It was a voice, a deep, steady voice that spoke in light. And the people answered not with words, but with architecture, with alignment, with silence. The temples of Heliopolis were more than stone. They were instruments, tuning forks for the cosmos, designed not for the living, but for the eternal dance of starlight and rhythm. Each shadow, each beam, each angle carved with the patience of centuries, all to receive something, some signal that perhaps only they could hear. Some scholars scoff. They say it's nonsense, that the ancients were simply primitive astronomers, obsessed with tracking solstices and planting seasons. But those who stood in the ruins on a silent morning, who felt the hush settle around their shoulders like a linen shawl, know better. There is intelligence here, not the kind scribbled in books or displayed in exhibitions, but a deep, devotional knowing, the kind that only comes from listening for thousands of years, the kind that speaks not in answers, but in invitation. And that is what Heliopolis still offers beneath the dust. Not certainty, but wonder. Tonight, as you close your eyes and sink into the stillness of this story, let yourself fall into that ancient invitation. Imagine a city that spoke to the stars and heard them speak back. Imagine priests who watched not for power, but for balance. Imagine a people who believed that light was not a thing to be conquered, but to be honored. And as you drift towards sleep, let the whisper of that city follow you, soft as starlight on water, faint as footprints in sand, but true, always true, because the desert remembers. And tonight, it's whispering your name. There's a moment in the morning, just before the sun crests the horizon, when the world seems to exhale. Not loudly, but in the way ancient trees sigh or rivers blink in first light. That hush, that stillness, is how the city of Heliopolis was born. Long before it was called Heliopolis, before the Greeks ever traced their fingers across its stones, this city was known as Yunu, the pillar. Not a pillar made of stone, but of purpose, of presence. It was the spine of a world held upright by light. And its people, though long gone, once built a city not for shelter, but for sunrise. Imagine it, a settlement that did not rise beside the Nile for trade, nor flourish by conquest, but one that blossomed like a desert flower, opening always to the east. In Yunu, the dawn was everything. Not just a time of day, but a being, a resurrection, a god. The rising sun, known as Khepri, the scarabidal deity of becoming, was honored here not in myth alone, but in the very stones of the earth. The temples and obelisks were built to greet him. Each day, like clockwork, like heartbeat, like hope. And each morning, the city waited, not with frenzy, but with reverence, as though they were not waking up, but being reborn. It's hard, in our world of artificial light and glassbox towers, to understand what it means to wait for the sun. But in Yunu, it was sacred practice, an act of listening. The entire city was an open palm stretched to the sky, hoping, once more, that the world would be granted another day. Archaeologists have long puzzled over why so few structures remain. Unlike Thebes or Memphis, Heliopolis left behind only fragments. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps permanence was never its purpose. Perhaps it was meant to exist only in the in-between, the space between darkness and day. You see, the priests of Yunu believed that creation itself began with light. Not fire, not clay, not storm or soil. Just light. A single shaft piercing the endless waters of none, the formless deep. And from that light came the Benben stone, rising like the first thought from the mind of the divine. That stone, sacred and pointed like the rays of the sun, became the very heart of the city. They say it stood where the great temple of Ra would later rise. A beacon, a memory, a symbol of what once was, and what must always return. When the first rays of the sun touched that stone, it was not mere illumination, it was reunion. The creator and the created, the breath and the body, one. And so, Heliopolis became the dwelling place of Ra, the sun god, the great eye that watched the world. He was not carved in monstrous form, not depicted with menace or wrath. Here he was warmth, he was rhythm, he was truth. Even in modern Cairo, the eastern light still casts a golden hush across the land. And if you stand quietly enough in the early hours, just as the call to prayer echoes and the birds begin their tentative hymn, you can feel it, what the ancients felt. A promise, a return, the rebirth of time itself. Heliopolis was the first to believe it, the first to shape its stones in harmony with that rhythm. Every angle, every doorway, every shadow was a calculation of devotion, a geometry of faith, not to rule the sun, but to follow it. Because in Yunu, power was not held in the hands of kings. It was carried in light, passed from east to west like a silent prayer, given freely, and received with awe. So sleep now, under this tale's warm veil, and dream not of empires built by men, but of cities carved by the breath of the sun. For once, long ago, in a land of golden silence, a people built a city not for themselves, but for the dawn. In the cool hush of twilight, the desert seems to stretch forever, vast and breathless, as though waiting for something sacred to rise. And in Heliopolis, something did. Not a palace, not a throne, but a flame turned into stone. Tall, silent, endless. The ancients called it the Benben, a name whispered like a spell, a syllable that carried the memory of the very beginning. Before gods had names, before night surrendered to light, before the sky met the earth. The Benben stone was not just sacred. It was the first form to rise from the watery chaos of none, the first boundary between nothingness and becoming. And from this idea, from this memory frozen in myth, came the pillars of flame, the obelisks of Heliopolis. They were not built as ornaments, nor as emblems of royal pride. They were songs in stone, verses reaching skyward in a tongue that only the stars could read. To stand before one was to witness a prayer held perfectly still, crafted from single blocks of red granite, dragged from quarries far to the south. Each obelisk was born in agony and wonder. The journey to Heliopolis was not one of miles, but of meaning. Every groove, every carving, every golden cap was aligned to the rhythms of the sun. And when they stood, tall and unyielding, they did not merely mark space. They became light itself, captured and fixed. The people believed that Ra, the sun god, would descend upon the apex of the obelisk at dawn, that as his first light touched the gleaming tip, often sheathed in electrum or gold, it would awaken the city, purify the earth, and carry blessings to the very roots of time. There's an ancient Egyptian word, Ak. It means radiant spirit. Some believe the obelisks were meant to become just that, radiant spirits made visible. A link between the gods above and the dwellers of dust below. And in Heliopolis, this connection was not metaphor. It was law. Even the shadows were sacred. The way sunlight fell around the obelisks was studied, measured, revered. At specific times of year, certain angles of light would touch thresholds, illuminate altars, or awaken glyphs hidden deep in the sanctuaries. Imagine it, a column taller than trees, burning gold in the morning quiet. A stone so smooth, so precise, that its shadow moves like a breath. And people, ordinary people, gathering to watch the dance of sunlight across it, as if attending the most delicate and divine performance. The obelisks were not alone. Each had a twin. Together they flanked the entrances of temples, forming a solar gate. One pillar for the rising, one for the setting. Balance, reflection, beginning and end. Today, few remain. One still stands in what is now the suburb of Materia, forgotten by most, rising from a fenced yard like a memory too tall to ignore. Others were taken, spirited away by empires who mistook reverence for possession. The obelisk of Heliopolis now stands in Rome, in Paris, in London. But they do not glow the same. The sky above them is foreign. The silence beneath them has changed. Still, if you visit one in the early morning, just before the city stirs, and lay your hand against its surface, not roughly, not in conquest, but gently like greeting something ancient and alive, you may feel a warmth that doesn't come from the sun above, but from the memory inside. Because some flames do not die. They take shape. They wait. So sleep now, beneath the ghost of the stone. Let story drift into you like a candle into water. Let its fire become your dream. For once, long ago, there was a city where light stood tall, and flame took the form of stone, to whisper with the sky. There are places in this world where stone seems to breathe, where walls, though broken, still pulse with warmth, where silence has weight, and where every grain of dust feels like a memory waiting to be remembered. Heliopolis was one such place. It was not loud, not like Memphis with its bustling markets, nor like Thebes with its grand processions. Heliopolis was quiet, deliberate, a city of light and listening. And in its temples, in its vast courtyards and sacred libraries, the very stones themselves seemed to speak. Or perhaps they sang. The people of Yenu believed that language was never born from mouths, but from the stars. That before humans carved sound into syllables, the cosmos had already been whispering truths into the world. Through wind, through fire, through water, and through stone. To them, stone was not inert. It was a vessel, a memory keeper, a voice. They carved with reverence, not decoration. Each glyph, each incision into limestone or granite was done with the care of a lullaby. Not to impress, but to transmit. Not to display, but to preserve harmony between heaven and earth. Every wall, every column, every threshold in Heliopolis was a score in a vast and sacred symphony. And though time has worn many of those carvings away, scraped by wind, stolen by empire, drowned beneath concrete and ash, some still remain. Some still sing. Archaeologists have discovered that the placement of stones in the great solar temples was not just for strength or symmetry. They formed acoustic corridors, passages where sound moved like water through a narrow channel, echoing, layering, becoming more than it began as. Some passages, when spoken into, amplified even the softest whisper, allowing the priest's voice to fill an entire courtyard without ever raising it. Others absorbed sound completely, drawing it inward, as if the stone were drinking the words, storing them, holding them forever in silence. There is one story, half myth, half memory, about a hidden chamber beneath the house of R.A. They called it the Chamber of Breath. It was said that if you sat within it, perfectly still in total darkness, and exhaled only once, your breath would return to you in music. Not music as we know it, not harps or flutes or chants, but something deeper, a resonance, a feeling, a memory of something you never knew you had lost. It said that the high priest would enter that chamber when the city faced imbalance, drought, illness, eclipse, not to ask for answers, but to listen, to hear what the stone remembered that they had forgotten, because that was the true power of Heliopolis, not knowledge, but remembrance. The hieroglyphs that adorned its temple walls were not just history, they were choreography, a dance of symbols meant to guide the reader not only through stories, but through states of being. You didn't simply read them, you felt them, in the body, in the breath, in the bones. They say certain phrases, when recited aloud within the temple, caused a soft vibration to move through the floor, a low hum that seemed to rise from the stone itself. A sacred frequency, not heard with ears, but with the soul. And here, beneath the golden silence of the sun, words became more than tools. They became spells. And stone, the choir, one priestess, now lost to time, is remembered in fragments as she who hears the stone. Her name was never written, not to protect her legacy, but to preserve her mystery. They say she could walk barefoot across the temple floor and know which stones held sorrow, which held joy, which had never been touched by voice. It is even whispered that she once heard the voice of R.A. himself, not through vision, but through vibration, as if his light had left a message carved beneath the world's breath. Today, as we stand in museums, behind glass and spotlights, staring at fragments of once singing temples, we forget the silence in which they were born. We see them as relics. Beautiful, yes, but mute. And yet, sometimes, late at night, when the world outside has gone quiet and the dust has settled over the windows, we might begin to hear it again. The soft hum, the quiet rhythm, the lullaby of stone. So let your eyes fall gently closed. Let your breath slow. Let your heartbeat match the rhythm of the deep earth beneath you. For somewhere, far beneath time, beneath cities and sky and memory itself, a voice still lingers in the stone, not calling to be heard, but to be felt, because Heliopolis was never just built of stone. It was built of song. Time has not moved the same way in the desert. In cities of glass and metal, we chase time, counting seconds, fearing hours, marking years with celebrations or regrets. But in Heliopolis, time was not a ruler. It was a river, a sacred current, one that could not be commanded, only read like wind over sand or the hush before dawn. And there were those who spent their entire lives listening to that river. The priests of Heliopolis were not men of power, but of patience. Not leaders, but watchers. They were the quiet heartbeat of the city, eyes tilted to the sky, hands steady over papyrus scrolls and pools of water that mirrored the stars. They walked barefoot across sacred courtyards at twilight, reading the language of shadow and light as others read ink on parchment. They were not concerned with war, not with gold, not with law. Their temple, the House of Ra, was not a place of sacrifice, but of observation. Because in Heliopolis, the sun was not merely divine. It was a clock not of hours, but of eternities. These priests charted the sun's journey across the sky, not with machines, but with stone markers and sacred intuition. They tracked the solstices, the equinoxes, the slow, imperceptible drift of Sirius as it reappeared in the summer sky, heralding the Nile's annual rising like the voice of a god returned from silence. They called themselves the Watchers of the Horizon, a title not of dominion, but of duty. And their task was not to control the world. It was to maintain its balance. You see, to the people of Yenu, the sun's rising was not guaranteed. Each morning was a question. Each sunrise, a blessing earned anew. They believed that without the prayers, rituals, and sacred calculations of the priesthood, the cosmos itself might fall out of alignment. That Ra's journey through the underworld each night was perilous, and only their vigilance could help guide him safely back into the sky. So every evening, they gathered in the chamber of night, where incense curled like breath, and stars began to awaken through narrow slits in the ceiling. They whispered ancient words, not as commands, but as offerings. They lit lamps. They poured water. They measured silence with the care of musicians tuning a sacred song. And they waited for Ra to return, for the promise of light. Some of them, it said, began to see differently over time, not with their eyes, but with their souls. One tale speaks of a priest who, after 20 years of uninterrupted dawn vigils, claimed he could see the threads of time, filaments of golden light stretching from the stars to the earth, bending gently with every choice made by man. He wrote nothing down. He spoke only to the obelisks. And one morning, he simply vanished. Some say he walked into the sun itself. Others say he became part of the rhythm he so carefully studied. No longer man, but pulse. Their knowledge was passed not through grand pronouncements, but in whispers, in gestures, in gaze, a tilt of the head toward the horizon, a finger tracing an invisible arc in the air, a breath held when Sirius rose before dawn. These were not priests of fear. They were priests of timing. They knew when to plant, when to rest, when to mourn, and when to wait. They were midwives of the sun's daily birth and stewards of the sacred order known as Ma'at, the delicate equilibrium that held the universe in place. When the balance faltered, when drought lingered, or eclipses swallowed the sky, they did not panic. They simply listened deeper. They returned to the water basins, the sky scrolls, the cycles within cycles within cycles, and waited for time to speak again. Today we have atomic clocks, satellites, algorithms. But there is a strange irony in our age. We measure time more precisely than ever before, and yet we seem to feel it less. The priests of Heliopolis did not need to know the minute or the second. They knew the moment, and they lived in reverence of it. So as you lie here now, breathing softly in the quiet dark, think of them, not as ghosts, but as quiet companions in the great hush of the night. Imagine a man, draped in linen robes, standing at the edge of a temple rooftop as the stars emerge above him. He says nothing, he writes nothing, but inside him, the entire rhythm of the cosmos is dancing. And he is listening, just as you are now. Let sleep come to you gently, like the slow turning of the heavens. Let your breath match the soft passage of stars over stone. And know that somewhere, far beneath time, the priests of Heliopolis are still watching, still waiting, still keeping the rhythm alive. There is a moment, brief, sacred, and easy to miss, when the sun stands directly above the earth. No tilt, no lean, no hesitation, just light, pure and vertical, descending like a column from the heart of the sky. In Heliopolis, that moment was not ordinary. It was divine. Noon in the city of the sun was unlike anywhere else in the ancient world. In that golden hush of the days, peak shadows vanished. Columns stood unburdened by silhouette. Faces glowed with an evenness that made them seem carved from sunlight. Even the smallest pebble seemed to belong wholly to the present moment, neither leaning toward the past nor stretching toward the future. A city without shadows. Not for long, of course. Not always. But long enough to mean something. The priest called it the moment of Ma'at, the perfect balance, a time when all things returned briefly to the equilibrium of creation, when the world held its breath between opposites, night and day, chaos and order, memory and possibility. It was a moment that could not be forced, only awaited, and once it came, everything stopped. The rituals were subtle. There were no gongs, no flames, no cries. Only stillness. A deliberate silence spread across the courtyards of Ra's temple. Scribes laid down their reeds. Priests removed their sandals and stood barefoot upon sun-warmed stone. And the people simply watched. Not with awe, not with fear, but with recognition. Because in that moment, they saw themselves not as individuals or subjects or laborers, but as reflections of the sun's grace, beings made of breath and rhythm and dust, standing in perfect alignment with the divine. It is said that the architecture of Heliopolis was built around this sacred noon, that the temples were designed to cast no shadow at that hour, that the great Benben obelisk, its golden tip gleaming like the eye of the cosmos, received the sun's full embrace in perfect unity. Even the water basins, which mirrored the sky like silver coins dropped into silence, would lose their shimmer for a heartbeat, as if light had become so absolute, so present, that even reflection was humbled. And yet, within this purity, there was no harshness, no blinding white, no sharp glare. The light of Heliopolis was never cruel. It was tender, curious, as if the sun, descending at its zenith, came not to command, but to understand. You see, to live in Yinu was to live in dialogue with the light, not as worshippers pleading for mercy, but as companions seeking balance. In a world where every temple, every altar, every courtyard was carefully aligned with celestial rhythm, noon became the sacred mirror, the moment in which truth revealed itself, not in words, but in stillness. In the absence of shadow, where nothing could hide and nothing needed to, there's an old tale, soft and half forgotten, of a child born in the shadowless hour. A girl with eyes the color of wet clay and a voice no louder than rain. The priest said she would never lie, for the sun had touched her heart when it was purest. She grew up never seeking power, never fearing silence. And when she died, the obelisk nearest her home cast a shadow in the shape of an open eye. Only once, and only for her. Was she real? Perhaps not. But perhaps stories, like sunlight, reveal more when they're not stared at directly. And so, dear listener, lie still now. Breathe as the ancients breathed, slowly, deeply, in rhythm with the sky. Let the burdens of your day fall away like morning mist. Let the shadows of worry dissolve. For you, too, are standing in that sacred noon. Even now, centuries and cities away, the spirit of Heliopolis waits in your breath. Not in the noise of ambition or the rush of tasks, but in that one fleeting, perfect pause. A pause without shadow, a pause full of light. So sleep now. Let the city embrace you not in its stones, but in its silence. For once, long ago, there was a place where time stood still, and the sun touched the world without leaving a single scar. And in that place, you were home. Not all libraries are built of walls and shelves. Some are hidden in shadowless corridors. Some are carved in silence. And some are made of light. The ancient city of Heliopolis, so often remembered for its temples and obelisks, held within its golden heart something stranger, softer, and more secret. A library, they say, that did not hold scrolls, but radiance. Its name was never recorded. Its builders never inscribed their titles in stone. And yet, it was believed by the priests to be the holiest of spaces, a place not of ritual, but of revelation. To find it, one had to pass through the courtyard of stillness, where the echo of your own footsteps would fold inward and vanish, and the walls seemed to hum faintly, like a lyre tuned to the breath of the sky. Beyond that courtyard, beneath a shallow dome adorned with golden hieroglyphs that shimmered faintly in the sun, there stood a single, windowless chamber. Its walls were polished to mirror-like smoothness, not to reflect your face, but to reflect the light that entered only once each year. That light did not come from the stars, or from lamps, or from flame. It came from the sun precisely at mid-year noon, when RA stood highest in the sky. For just a few breaths, a single beam slipped through a hidden aperture above the dome and struck a stone in the center of the chamber. And when it did, the walls awakened. What appeared blank for the rest of the year became alive with writing. Not inked, but revealed. Lines of glyphs that had been etched so shallowly into the surface that only the light of RA at that precise angle could bring them forth. They called them the sun glyphs, and to see them was to read with your soul, not your eyes. The priests who guarded this room were few. They did not read aloud. They did not copy. They did not speak of what was revealed. They simply stood, barefoot and breathless, as the glyphs flickered into being, and then, slowly, faded again, like dreams returning to sleep. What do these glyphs say? What secrets did the Library of Light hold? No one knows, and that is precisely the point. This was not a library for scholars or kings. It was not built to teach, but to remind, to stir some ancient, hidden truth within those who stood in its golden hush. Perhaps it was never meant to be understood in language at all, but in sensation, in memory, in breath. Some say the glyphs were the first words ever spoken by the sun. Others believe they were messages from the stars, carved into the stone by light itself, long before the city was ever born. There's an old tale passed down among Cairo's desert guides of a French archaeologist who stumbled upon the ruins of what might have been this chamber. It was buried beneath layers of sand and modern detritus. He wrote in his journal that the room smelled of heat, though it was cold, and that the walls looked empty, but made the hair on my neck rise as if they were watching me. One afternoon, as he sat alone with a mirror, trying to redirect sunlight into the chamber's ceiling aperture, he caught something out of the corner of his eye, a glyph that seemed to pulse and then vanish. He never saw it again. He closed his journal that night with a single line. Some truths are carved only in the light between dreams. And perhaps that is what the priests of Heliopolis always knew. That not all knowledge must be held. That some wisdom lives not in facts or formulas, but in the warmth that spreads across your skin when the light comes in just so. That truth is not something we seek, but something that reveals itself when we become still enough, open enough to receive it. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and your breath softens, imagine yourself standing in that ancient chamber. Feel the coolness of the polished stone under your feet. Hear the quiet, deep and sacred. And then, slowly, feel the warmth on your skin as the first light touches the center of the room. The air changes. Something flickers. A wordless story begins to rise, not around you, but within you. You may not understand it. You don't need to. It's enough to feel it. Sleep now in a library of light, where no books are opened, where no scrolls are unrolled, and where the only truth that matters is the one that glows. For just a moment, and then returns to silence. In Heliopolis, the gods did not live in statues. They did not sit stiff and still upon stone thrones, waiting for offerings to stir them. They did not dwell in distant heavens, peering down with judgment or envy. No, in Heliopolis the gods walked, and they walked as flame. To live in Yinu was to exist not beneath your gods, but within them. The air, the light, the warmth beneath your skin at dawn, it was not mere weather. It was presence. The divine was not above you. It moved through you in every glint of gold on temple walls, in every shadow that bent reverently at sunrise. The greatest of these flames was Ra, the sun itself. He did not come to command or to conquer. He came to rise again and again and again. Each morning, as his first light crept across the stones of the city, the priests and the people alike would turn eastward, not with duty, but with devotion. Ra was not a symbol. He was the daily miracle, the god who returned from death each night, after traveling through the dark coils of the underworld, and emerged, reborn, in brilliance. Imagine that, a god who dies for you every night and rises again every dawn, not out of obligation, but out of love. And the people answered that love not with thunder or fire, but with ritual, with rhythm, with watching. The rising of Ra was choreographed like a celestial ballet. Obelisk caught his first light and sent it cascading across courtyards. Pools shimmered with his arrival, turning still water into molten gold. The columns of the temple were placed not only for strength, but to channel and divide the morning sun into precise paths of illumination, as if guiding him home. But Ra was not alone. Adam, the evening sun, older and more introspective, walked the city at dusk. He was the same deity in another form, a god who had grown tired, wise, and quiet. While Ra burned with youth and movement, Adam radiated something deeper, the sacred hush of endings. There was also Khepri, the morning sun as scarab beetle, an eternal symbol of becoming, and Horus, the sky child, whose left I was the moon, and whose right I burned like the sun itself, and Sekhmet, lioness of flame, protector of Maat, whose very breath was said to ignite the desert wind. And they came not as strangers. They were known. Heliopolis did not worship gods in the way we understand worship today. It remembered them, as if recalling something ancient and familiar, something buried in the bones, in the breath, in the space between heartbeats. The gods were not imagined. They were felt. Sometimes, people would speak of a sudden warmth brushing the skin at night, as though someone had passed beside them, though no one stood there. Others reported dreams where the sun rose not in the sky, but in their chests. A priest once wrote of a vision during a midday ritual in which the flame atop the incense bowl rose and danced without wind, forming the shape of a falcon's eye before vanishing in silence. In these moments, the veil thinned, and fire was no longer danger. It was memory made visible, because in Yinu, flame was not destruction. It was presence. The gods walked not to scorch, but to remind. Remind the people that they were not forgotten. That life itself was not an accident, but a pattern, a dance of birth, death, and rebirth. A rhythm of light across the skin of the earth. One cannot speak of Heliopolis without speaking of its flame-born gods, because the city itself was built not merely of limestone and granite, but of fire turned to form. The walls were warm. The floors radiated. Even the hieroglyphs seemed to glow faintly in the right light, as if still remembering the divine hand that once moved above them. And though the temples have fallen, and the fire has quieted, some say that on certain mornings, when the Cairo sky is cloudless and the air unusually still, a soft heat can be felt rising from the ruins at Mataria, not from the sun above, but from within the stones, as if something ancient still lingers, as if the gods are not gone, but waiting, still walking, still watching. So sleep now, wrapped not in shadow, but in flame. Feel the gentle warmth behind your eyelids, the quiet burn at the edge of your dreams. That is not imagination. That is memory. That is divinity returning to you in silence. For once, in a city of gold and rhythm, the gods walked as flame, and tonight, they walk beside you still. By day, Heliopolis burned with gold. By night, it shimmered with questions. When the sun slipped behind the curve of the world and the gods descended into the hidden river of the Duat, the underworld, the sky opened. And above the sleeping city, 1,000 eyes awakened. Stars. But the people of Yinu did not see stars the way we do. Not as distant suns. Not as cold and lifeless. They were watchers. Messengers. Signs. Each one a pulse in the great body of the cosmos, blinking softly through time. The priests who studied them were not called astronomers. There was no such division then. They were keepers of the sky, measurers of silence, interpreters of eternity. And they did not simply map the heavens, they listened to them. To understand how deeply the stars were woven into Heliopolitan life, you must first unlearn everything you've been told about separation, about science on one side and myth on the other, about sky above and earth below. In Heliopolis, everything was one. When the priests stood atop their stone platforms, heads tilted toward the constellations, they were not simply watching, they were participating. They were reading a sacred script written in points of fire. A story that repeated across generations, but never quite the same way twice. Some nights, they focused on Sirius, known to them as Sopdet, the brightest star in the night sky. Its return each summer, just before dawn, marked the beginning of the Nile's flood, and with it, the rebirth of the land. This was no coincidence. This was divine choreography. They said Sirius was the tear of Isis, falling in grief for Osiris, her slain husband. And each time it returned, the gods remembered and the river rose. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed like superstition, but to those who truly watched, truly waited, Sirius was not just a star. It was a promise. a whisper that the world still turned, that morning could lead to renewal. Then there was Orion, Sa, the celestial hunter, his belt a straight line of certainty in a sky of shifting chaos. Many believed he was Osiris himself, reborn in the firmament. His appearance marked the thinning of the veil, the season when the dead walked close to the living. The priest studied his path across the sky, not for spectacle, but for guidance. If Orion tilted too early, if he disappeared too soon, it was not just an astronomical anomaly. It was a message. They charted the moon. They watched Venus shimmer just before dawn. They followed Jupiter and Mars with reverence. To them, the wandering planets were not planets at all. They were lights that refused to obey, gods on unique journeys across the field of time. Even a Milky Way, that long river of starlight, was not an accident of vision. It was the celestial Nile, flowing above, mirroring the sacred waters below. The priest said that what happened in one happened in the other. Flood and famine, life and loss. They recorded what they saw, not with telescopes or graphs, but with intuition and memory. Long papyrus scrolls wrapped in linen, tucked into jars and chambers now lost to sand. Sometimes they did not write at all, only remembered, passing the rhythm down in chants, in breath, in stories told to children just before sleep. There is a myth, old, unconfirmed, but persistent, that the inner sanctum of the Temple of Ra contained a ceiling of stone embedded with lapis lazuli and gold. Tiny flecks that, when struck by a single oil lamp, mirrored the night sky of a specific day, long past or yet to come. It was not decorative. It was functional, a memory of the cosmos, carved into roof and ritual. One visiting priest from another city, his name erased from time, was said to have spent an entire year in Heliopolis simply watching, not speaking, not asking, just standing beneath that ceiling night after night, until one day he closed his eyes and said, "I finally understand what silence means." He left the next morning. No record of him was ever found again. Some believe he walked into the desert, following Orion's belt. Others say he vanished at dawn, but his story remains. Because in Heliopolis, stories were not endings. They were alignments. And so tonight, as you lie beneath your own roof, perhaps miles from any true dark sky, know this. Above you, the stars still move. They still blink. They still speak. And in the rhythm of their turning, something old stirs. You may not see it. You may not understand it, but you can feel it if you become quiet enough. A pull, a presence, a pattern, like breath, like sleep, like light folding slowly into shadow. Let your eyes close, let your body soften, and let the watchers of the sky do their work. For once long ago, there was a city that knew. The stars were not just far away. They were eyes, and they were always watching. There is a truth older than kings, deeper than stone, and more enduring than monuments. A truth so quiet it cannot be spoken, only felt, only lived. The ancient Egyptians called it ma'at, not a rule, not a law, but a principle, soft as breath, strong as flame. A cosmic balance that stitched the universe together like threads of golden linen. And in Heliopolis, Ma'at was not just honored. She was embodied in every column, in every shadow, in every silence that fell between the footsteps of the priests. She was the heartbeat of the city, the unseen architecture behind all visible things. Her symbol was a feather, specifically an ostrich feather, curved and delicate, placed upon the head of the goddess Ma'at. But this was no mere ornament. The feather was the final measure, the quiet test at the end of every journey. You see, when a soul departed the body, It entered the hall of two truths, where the heart was weighed against that single feather. Not by human judgment, not by punishment, but by harmony. If the heart was heavy, burdened by lies, cruelty, imbalance, it would tip the scales, and the soul would be devoured by Amit, the eater of the dead. But if it was light, free of deceit, aligned with truth, it would rise. Free, eternal, at peace. In Heliopolis, this weighing was not distant mythology. It was daily life. The flame of Ra, the brilliance of the sun, was nothing without Ma'at. Even gods were bound to her. Even the cosmos deferred to her quiet command. Each morning, when Ra emerged from the underworld, it was only through Ma'at's guidance that he could rise again. Together, the feather and the flame held the world. It was said that Ra kept Ma'at close to his lips like a breath, so that his words would always speak truth. That he ate her essence each morning, not to consume her, but to become worthy of light. Temples to Ma'at were rare, for her dwelling was not confined. She lived in the gesture of a fair judgment, in the pause before a lie, in the silence one kept rather than speak a cruelty. The priests of Heliopolis trained not only in celestial movement, but in moral stillness. They studied not just astronomy and ritual, but the ethics of harmony. They believed that even the smallest act could tilt the scale of the universe. A harsh word, a broken promise, a neglected prayer, all of it mattered, because all of it rippled. They did not fear punishment. They feared imbalance, not for their own sake, but for the rhythm of all things. It is said that the inner sanctum of the temple of Ra held a chamber, small and round, lined with feathers carved into the stone. In the center, a single oil lamp was lit each morning. If the flame flickered too quickly or bent to one side, the priest would fast in silence that day, believing the balance had been disturbed. The lamp was called the breath of Ma'at, and no one, not even the high priest, could speak in its presence. We live now in a world of noise, of imbalance, of flame without feather, brightness without stillness. And yet, something of Ma'at remains. It lives in the hush between arguments, in the weight of a choice, in the quiet ache when we know we have drifted from what is right. It lives in the body, in the breath, in the dream. So tonight, as you lie down in silence, feel for that feather, not in your hand, but in your heart. Does it rest lightly? Can it float in the stillness between your breaths? Let your mind become a scale. Let your body become the flame. And let sleep come like a whisper of balance returning. For once, long ago, there was a city where truth wore no crown, carried no sword. It wore only a single feather, and moved beside the sun like a shadowless guide. And in that city, the world stayed whole. Deep beneath the golden sunlight of Heliopolis, far from the obelisks that sang with dawn, and the courtyards that bathed in celestial fire, there existed something quieter, a labyrinth, not carved in malice or secrecy. No prison, no trap, but in reverence. A winding corridor of corridors, sacred in its stillness, designed not for sight, but for sound. It was said that those who entered the labyrinth did not find themselves lost. They found their voice. The priests called it the womb of the word, a network of passageways where even the faintest whisper could dance for hours, folding itself back through the stone like a memory that refused to fade. It was built with deliberate curves, soft angles, and subtle chambers that caught sound the way a shell holds the sea. No one knows who first carved it. No inscription names its architect. Some say it was not built all at once, but slowly, in layers, each generation adding another ring, another corner, another voice. And always they carved in silence, because in this place, words did not simply travel. They stayed, A cough, a sigh, a prayer, once spoken, would bounce from wall to wall, echoing softly, gently decaying but never fully vanishing. The effect was not haunting, it was hallowed. Those who walked the labyrinth learned quickly. To speak here was to be heard forever. That is why the priests did not teach within a labyrinth. They listened. Initiates were sent down alone, barefoot, robes clinging to skin damp with subterranean stillness. They were instructed not to speak, but to breathe, to wait, to hear the voices of those who had come before, voices caught in curves of limestone, spiraling back from generations past like faint music through sleep. It's said that the labyrinth held memory without ink, a scripture of vibration, a sacred archive without scrolls. And in the very center of it all, in the smallest and roundest of the inner chambers, was what the priests called the echo heart. A perfectly carved sphere, its acoustics so finely tuned that even the softest sound would bounce continuously, spiraling inwards, never truly fading. Visitors were rare. Most were uninvited. Only those whose breath had become steady, whose minds had learned to quiet their hunger for meaning, were permitted to kneel within the echo heart and speak just one word. One word only. A name, a question, a grief, and then silence. The word would return, not as it was spoken, but changed, distorted slightly by the stone, expanded, distilled. And it is said that what you heard in return was not an echo, but an answer. One high priest, his name lost, as all proper names in this story must be, entered the labyrinth in his final year of life. He had lived long, guided many, memorized the stars, felt the pulse of Ma'at in his own body. And yet, he carried one question. He entered the labyrinth barefoot, spoke his question at the center of the chamber, and listened. What returned was a single sound, a low hum, soft, steady, like a child being sung to sleep. He left the labyrinth and never spoke again. But those who walked beside him afterward said his silence was not empty. It glowed, like a flame inside glass, like wisdom too delicate for words. Today, the labyrinth is lost, its entrance swallowed by centuries of sand, its chambers buried beneath a city that no longer knows what it walks upon. But some believe that sound never dies, that it lives, waiting under the surface of things. And sometimes when the night is quiet enough, when the wind moves just so through the alleys of Cairo, you might hear it, a faint chant, a breath turned backwards, a voice with no body, just an echo returning home. So sleep now. Let your own thoughts drift into the quiet corridors. Let the words you no longer need fall softly to the floor. Let your breath become still and stiller and stiller. For once, long ago, in a city carved by stars and silence, there was a place where words did not end. They lingered, and they are waiting still. Heliopolis was a city that bowed to the sun, not as a distant star, but as a living rhythm, a god who arrived not with thunder, but with timing. And in the very heart of that city, beneath stone carved not to impress, but to align, there was said to be a chamber unlike any other. It had no official name, but among the priests, it was called the Room of Eternal Noon, a space hidden beneath the great temple of Ra, accessible only by a narrow stairwell that curved in a perfect spiral, a spiral matching the coils of the solar serpent, each step echoing with the weight of centuries. To enter was not simply to descend. It was to surrender to stillness. The room itself was small, circular, domed like the inside of a golden eye. Its walls were smooth, free of glyphs, undecorated. Not because it lacked meaning, but because meaning had already arrived. There was no flame, no torch, no lamp. Instead, above, a single aperture, an opening no wider than a child's hand, was carved through meters of stone. And through this aperture, once a year, on a day and hour so precise that even the Nile held its breath, the light of noon would fall. Not just any noon, but the noon, the exact center of the sun's annual journey. A moment so delicate, so precise, that it was said not even the gods moved. For just a few minutes, that solitary beam of light would descend through the stone, striking the polished white floor with perfect symmetry. No angle, no tilt, no shadow. The light would fill the space, not with brightness, but with a still, golden hush. And for those inside, the few allowed to sit cross-legged beneath that shaft of silence, time would dissolve. The body would feel neither hunger nor fatigue. The breath would slow until it barely stirred the air. And the mind would fall quiet, as if someone had opened a window inside the soul, and the noise of the world had drifted out on the wind. This moment, this brief, eternal noon, was not recorded in any public scrolls. It was not taught. It was remembered, handed down from priest to priest in whispers softer than sand, because the experience was not something that could be taught. It had to be lived. Those who returned from the chamber often spoke little, not out of secrecy, but out of awe. One priest wrote, in a rare personal note hidden behind layers of ritual text, "When the light touched my brow, I did not feel illuminated. I felt forgotten, and in that forgetting, I remembered who I truly was." What did he mean? Perhaps he meant that the self we carry, this bundle of thoughts and names and worries, is not who we are beneath the light. That in the absence of shadow, there is no mask, no division, only presence. The eternal noon was not a time of revelation. It was a time of return. Return to stillness. Return to breath. Return to a moment that did not pass, but simply was. It is said that the priests believed the chamber sat atop an invisible axis, a pivot point of the world, not physical, but spiritual, that when the beam of noon light struck that exact center, the entire cosmos aligned. For a breath, for a blink, as if the universe itself remembered its origin. And perhaps that is why the chamber was made. Not to house gods, not to trap time, but to offer witness to that impossible stillness that lives beneath all motion, beneath all sound, beneath all striving. Today, the room is gone, buried, forgotten by maps, dismissed by scholars. But sometimes in deep meditation or in the golden hush between two thoughts, people speak of entering a space they cannot name, a moment without tension, a breath without weight, and they come back changed. So perhaps the eternal noon was not lost. Perhaps it was never just a room. Perhaps it lives now within us, in every quiet pause, in every sacred stillness, in every choice to sit and be. And so, tonight, let yourself enter it. Close your eyes. Feel the light not outside, but within. Let go of clocks, of plans, of the ticking of moments. Let yourself fall into that golden center, where nothing rushes, where nothing breaks, where all that exists is this: a breath, a heartbeat, a hush. This is your noon. It is not passing. It is waiting. And in it, you are held perfectly, endlessly, by light that casts no shadow. Before there were gods and thrones and names etched into stone, before even the first prayer found its voice, there was a bird, not a bird of flesh, not truly, but a being of shimmer, of rhythm, of breathless becoming. The Egyptians called it Bennu. In other tongues, it would be known as the phoenix. But here, in Heliopolis, where sun met soul and fire walked the earth, Bennu was not a legend. He was a presence, a whisper of divinity with wings. It said he came not often, only when the world had forgotten itself, only when the rhythm had faltered. And when he did arrive, he came not from the sky, but from the sun, A single bird-shaped flicker of gold, burning, shimmering, landing softly upon the sacred Benben stone at the heart of Ra's temple. The same stone believed to be the first shape that ever rose from the primordial sea. It is said that the Bennu would land without sound, and the air around him would grow still, not heavy, but expectant, as though time itself were holding its breath. His feathers shimmered like morning mist above a flame. His eyes, they said, were as old as light. No one touched him. No one tried to cage him, because Bennu was not a bird in the ordinary sense. He was rebirth made visible. Each time he came, he brought fire. Not a fire that consumed, but one that transformed. And when the time was right, when the weight of the world had begun to tilt too far, Bennu would build a nest of myrrh, sweet, bitter, sacred, and lay himself within it. He would sing a single note, just one, and the note would tremble through the air like a thread of golden silk, curling through the temple's hollows, reaching every hidden ear, even the ones buried beneath generations of silence. And then he would burn, not violently, but tenderly, bright as truth, soft as forgiveness. His feathers became flame. His bones became ash. And the ashes were gathered by the high priests in silence, in awe. They were not buried. They were not spread. They were placed within a golden egg, sealed with sacred words, and laid again at the top of the Benben stone. And from that egg, over hours or days or even years, Bennu would rise again, the same, yet not, new, yet ancient. He would stretch his wings, still glowing with the memory of fire, and take flight once more into the sky, vanishing beyond the edge of what could be known. The priests never tried to explain him. They did not study him. They simply waited, because they understood what the world often forgets. Some things must die to be born again. They built no temples to Bennu. They left no great monuments. For how do you honor something that builds its own altar out of flame? And yet, his presence was everywhere, in the renewal of the Nile, in the rebirth of the sun each morning, in the crumbling of the old, and the quiet, sacred making of the new. Heliopolis itself was seen as Bennu's nest, a city built not to last forever, but to burn with purpose and rise again in the memories of those who would one day dream of light. And today, perhaps, he still visits, not as a bird of flame, but as a stirring in your chest, a warmth at the moment of letting go, a single golden note you can't quite hear, but feel. Maybe it's in the moment when you release something you thought you couldn't, or when you forgive something you thought you never would, or when you step into the fire of change and discover you're not burning, but becoming. So tonight, as your body softens into sleep, let go of what no longer serves. Lay your sorrows gently in the nest of your breath. Let the warmth of your own heart become the flame. And know this, once, long ago, in a city made of sunlight and story, a bird of fire sang only once. And in that note, the world began again. Every city has its noise, its pageantry, its proud monuments, its gods of gold and sunlight. Heliopolis was no different. It was the city of Ra, the beacon of the sky, the beating heart of the day. His light touched every obelisk, every offering table, every voice raised in mourning hymns. But light, by its nature, cast shadows. And in those shadows, something else waited. Not evil, not danger, but something quieter, something forgotten. Because while Ra rose in brilliance and Bennu burned with rebirth, there were other presences older, softer, more patient. Gods who did not demand temples, who did not rage in myth or triumph in battle, who came not in fire, but in hush. They were worshipped not in ceremony, but in stillness, in the corner of the garden, in the lingering smoke after incense. in the breath held just before dawn. One of them was Adam, the twilight form of Ra, not his rival, but his reflection. Where Ra was becoming, Adam was returning. Where Ra blazed, Adam breathed. He was the god of the end of the day, the moment the sun slid behind the horizon and the world exhaled. They said he came into being not by birth, but by will. That he rose from the waters of none alone, complete, without origin or mother. That he spoke the world into being not with thunder, but with a single name. Adam did not rule from a throne. He sat quietly in the cool sanctuaries, the ones few entered, the ones where light never reached. He asked for nothing, and in doing so, became sacred. And there was Heka, not a god in the way we think of gods, but a force, a principle, magic they called him, but not illusion, not trickery. Heka was the breath between word and world, the power by which gods themselves existed. He was invoked, yes, but rarely named, not out of fear, but out of intimacy, because to speak his name was to awaken the hidden workings of creation. And in Heliopolis, they respected that kind of power by not disturbing it. Even the great god Thoth, more revered in Hermopolis, had a silent corner in the city of the sun, the keeper of time, the scribe of the heavens, the one who counted stars, not for beauty, but for balance. There was a chamber, they said, with no walls, only a ring of standing stones arranged to mark the movement of Sirius, where once a year, the priests of Heliopolis would read the night like a scroll. And as they did, they would call, not aloud, but in thought, to Thoth. And if he answered, it was not with voice, but with clarity. But not all the forgotten gods were grand. Some were protectors of thresholds, of sleep, of grief. There was Renenutet, goddess of the granary and of nourishment. She was not crowned or painted on great pylons, but her image, sometimes just a cobra curled near a doorway, was placed where children slept, where crops were stored, where bread was broken. Because in Heliopolis, even the small acts, eating, sleeping, dreaming, were sacred. And so were the quiet gods who watched over them. And so, as the sun rose and fell each day, as priests recited the great hymns to Ra, as obelisks caught fire in gold-reflected sky, these lesser gods, these forgotten gods, remained. Not angry, not abandoned, just watching, just waiting, because divinity, in truth, does not hunger for attention. It simply is. And those who truly listened, who walked barefoot through the quiet courtyards at dusk, who sat in shadowed corners with closed eyes and an open heart, heard them still. A name brushed across the skin, a warmth in the cold part of the temple, a scent of myrrh with no fire burning, a stillness that pressed not on the body, but on the soul. And perhaps you have felt them too. Perhaps once you sat in your home and felt something shift, not outside, but within, a pause in your thoughts, a deep quiet that felt not empty, but full. And you could not explain it. You do not need to, because not all gods come to be known. Some come to be felt. And now, as you drift into sleep, let them come to you, these forgotten gods. Let them sit beside your dreams. They will not speak. They never do, but they will remain. For once, long ago, in a city of gold and rhythm, the forgotten gods stood in silence and kept the balance between breath and flame, and they have not left. The Nile never flowed through Heliopolis, and yet it was always there, just as the moon does not touch your skin but still stirs your blood. So too did the Nile move the soul of this city, quietly, rhythmically, like a prayer carried on distant water. Heliopolis stood just east of the great river, perched on drier ground, where sunrise arrived more directly, where the gods of light could step forward without resistance. And still, the Nile was present. It whispered to the city through sacred canals, thin ribbons of water, hand-dug by the devoted, flowing gently from the Nile's edge into the temple courtyards. Not for transport, not for trade, but for ritual. These were not rivers. They were veins. Through them, the living current of the Nile entered the holy heart of Yunu, bringing not just moisture to parched earth, but meaning to the rhythm of life. The water was not water. It was Happy, the god of fertility, of renewal, of sacred overflowing. And when it reached the altars and pools of Heliopolis, it was not poured. It was invited. Priests in white linen would wait at dawn with copper bowls in hand. They would kneel beside the inner basin, polished and lined with alabaster, and dip their hands into the coolness with the tenderness of someone reaching into memory. Because they believed the Nile did not simply flow. It remembered. It remembered creation. It remembered the first flood. It remembered the silence before speech. And so they called it the Golden River, not because of its color, but because of its soul. You see, when the morning sun struck the temple pools, the water glowed. Not blue, not silver, but gold. It shimmered with a warmth that seemed to rise from within, not merely reflecting the light of RA, but speaking to it, as if river and sun recognized each other across time, as if they were old friends meeting again each morning, smiling through ripples and rays. The water in Heliopolis was never still, not in motion, but in presence. Even when it lay quiet in stone basins, it moved with thought. A breeze could stir it. A whisper could wake it. A prayer could change its shape. They believed that if you spoke to the Nile's water before sunrise, just once, gently, with a true heart, it would carry your words down its long, winding body, all the way past the delta, past the sea, past the veil between life and death. They believed the Nile could listen, and sometimes if the world was quiet enough, it could respond. There is a legend, told not in texts, but in firelight, that a grieving woman once poured her tears into the sacred pool at the temple of RA. She had lost her child in the season of the flood, and no priest's words could console her. She wept beside the water until she fell asleep. And in her dream, a voice, not loud, not kind, just real, rose from the basin. It said only, "He waits in the current." She woke and told no one. But every year afterward, on the day the Nile first rose, she returned to the temple alone. Not to weep, not to ask, but to wait, to sit by the water, to feel the golden shimmer on her hands, and to listen, because that is what the Golden River taught. That time is not only forward. That loss is not absence. That water remembers what the world forgets. Even today, the canals have dried. The basins lie cracked, filled with dust instead of light. But the Nile still flows, not through Heliopolis, but around it, as if circling something sacred it cannot bear to disturb. And sometimes, just before sunrise, a thin mist rises from the river's edge near Mataria. It curls into the streets. It drifts past forgotten stones. And in it, if you breathe carefully, you might catch the scent of water long gone. Sweet, cold, holy. So sleep now, dear listener. Let your breath become a current. Let your body float like a boat across the stillness. Let the memory of the river move through you, not to carry you away, but to bring you home. For once, long ago, there was a city of light that never touched the Nile, but listened to its story every morning and called it sacred. In the beginning, they say there was no language, no names, no chants, no car prayers, only a single tone stretched softly across the surface of creation. A tone so gentle, so pure, that the chaos itself fell still to listen. It was not a voice. It was not even a melody. It was a lullaby, And in Heliopolis, the priests believed this lullaby had never ended. That beneath all ritual and rhythm, beneath all stone and ceremony, the world still hummed with that ancient song. You just had to grow quiet enough to hear it. They called it the breath behind the sun, a vibration, not sung aloud, but carried in silence. Between sunrise and shadow, between the first light and the first word, the first lullaby. It was said that only the most attuned priests, those who had fasted for days, bathed in star-washed pools, and slept beneath the open sky, could perceive it. Not with their ears, but with the center of the chest, where the breath softens into rhythm and the heartbeat meets memory. The temple had no hymnal for this song, no notes, no record, because it was not created, it was remembered. And remembering it, they believed, was not an act of study, but of surrender. The first lullaby lived in places most never entered. In the air between the obelisks at dawn, in the hollow throat of a clay pot untouched by wind, in the pause before a prayer was spoken. To the priests of Heliopolis, the lullaby was the voice of Maat herself, rocking the world gently in her arms, keeping the stars in their paths, not through force, but through soothing. They said even Ra, the god of light and creation, had been born into it, that before he rose each morning, before he fought a pep through the dark coils of the night, he listened to the lullaby and was comforted. There was a chamber, small, circular, sunken into the earth, known only as the hush. No carvings adorned its walls. No torches were allowed. Inside it, the silence was so complete that the heartbeat of one person could echo across the room like a drumbeat in a dream. It was here, they said, that the first lullaby could sometimes be felt. Not heard, felt. The body would begin to sway. The breath would slow. And a warmth, not hot, not cold, just present, would settle over the skin like a soft blanket. Sometimes priests entered the hush weeping and left silent, not because the pain had gone, but because it had been held. Because this song, this lullaby, was not meant to change the world. It was meant to remind it that it was loved. It is whispered that the first lullaby was also sung to the dying, not aloud, but through touch, fingertips against the temples, palms resting on the chest. And those who passed in its presence did so not in fear, but as if falling asleep in familiar arms, cradled by a melody that had once rocked their soul before their first breath. And perhaps it still sings. Perhaps tonight, as you lie in the quiet dark, you felt it, that sudden hush, that warmth behind the ribs, that moment when time seems to pause, not stop, not flee, but pause, as if listening. That is the lullaby. It is not a song you'll find on any recording. It's not a poem you can read. It lives only in moments like this, when you are still, when you are safe, when you are held. So rest now. Let your breath become slow, even. Let your limbs grow soft. Let the hum of the ancient world cradle you. There is no need to understand, no need to ask, only to receive. For once, long ago, before the sun had a name and the stars had stories, there was a song. It asked nothing. It promised nothing. It simply was, and it is still here, waiting for you to listen. Heliopolis was, above all, a city of light. It welcomed the sun with open temples, mirrored its path with perfect architecture, and worshipped the golden rhythm of day. But in the hours when Ra slipped beneath the horizon and the sky grew black and wide, something older stirred above the city, something deeper. The stars. And Heliopolis, for all its brilliance beneath the sun, did not forget them. In truth, it was built for them. The priests believed that before any structure could rise from stone, it must be born in sky. Every angle, every doorway, every corridor, all of it had to first align, not with kings, not with conquest, but with the constellations. Because the heavens were not distant. They were ancestral. They were blueprint. The stars were not seen as separate from the divine. They were the divine. Eyes of the gods. Windows into memory. Markers of sacred return. And some of those stars no longer exist. Not in our sky. Not to our eyes. But once, they say, they shone briefly, brightly, guiding the minds of Heliopolis like candles placed gently in the dark. One of these lost lights was called Septet Inc., the living flame of the East. It no longer appears in our night sky. No telescope finds it. No chart marks it. But the priests of Heliopolis knew it well. And many believe the main temple's eastern wall was aligned not with Sirius, but with this vanished star. A celestial memory. A grief in orbit. They built for it. Prayed to it. Waited for its return year after year. Because in Heliopolis, time was not linear. It moved in circles, in returns, in echoes. And the stars marked not just months or seasons, but souls. The belief was simple. Each person had a star. Not metaphorically, but truly. A twin light, flickering far above, pulsing quietly in time with their breath. And when a soul left the body, it returned to that star. Not to be judged, but to shine. It is why, to this day, when we lose someone we love, we look up. Not down, not within, but up. Because some truths never fade. Heliopolis honored these stellar twins not in name, but in placement. There were courtyards designed to only fully reveal their geometry when the light of specific stars struck the stone at a precise angle. An angle that may have only occurred once every century. Some pillars were built to mirror the distance between stars in a specific constellation, not for aesthetic, but for resonance. They believed that when the architecture echoed the heavens, the human heart would recognize it, subtly, deeply, without words. And perhaps it does. Have you ever stood in a space that felt familiar though you'd never been there? Have you ever gazed at a night sky and felt, for a single breath, that you were being watched? Not in fear, but with tenderness? That is the feeling the architects of Heliopolis pursued. To live in a city where earth reflected sky, where your feet remembered what your soul had always known, that you belonged to something vast, and it remembered your name. There is a story, whispered only at the end of long vigils, that one priest, after decades of service, requested to be buried not in the temple's necropolis, but standing arms open, beneath an open-air stone circle that perfectly framed a single star at midnight. He said he wanted to rise again, not through fire, but through light. And perhaps he has. Perhaps he flickers now in a star we cannot name. Perhaps we pass beneath him without knowing. And perhaps that is enough. So tonight, as you lie beneath your own ceiling, wood or plaster, brick or sky, know this. There are stars above you that no longer exist. There are stars that burn for you still. And somewhere, in the hush beyond memory, your light is waiting to return. Let your breath slow. Let your limbs grow heavy. And let your soul lift, gently, softly, to join the quiet dance above. For once, long ago, there was a city that built not for now, but for the flicker of something eternal. And though its stones have fallen, its stars remain, and they're watching still. There's a silence found only in water, a silence so deep it hums, a silence that listens more than it speaks. And in Heliopolis, they did not fear that silence. They built for it. Among the sun-drenched courtyards and gleaming obelisks, beyond the golden rites and rhythmic chants, there were places of quiet stillness, shallow pools of water carved into the temple's foundation, lined with polished alabaster or dark basalt. These were not decorative fountains. They were mirrors, mirrors of the sky, They were placed with deliberate intention, not to cool the air, not to feed the birds, but to see, because the people of Heliopolis believed that the world above, the stars, the constellations, the great rivers of light across the night sky, was more than distant beauty. It was memory, and that memory could be drawn downward if the surface was calm enough. So they made the waters still. At night, the priests would gather in silence. No torches, no songs, only stars above and stars below, as if the sky had gently fallen into the earth and lay floating there, waiting to be read. One did not look up in those moments. One looked down, into the pool, into the reflection, into the face of the cosmos, trembling, inverted, and impossibly near. The pools were aligned with precision. Some captured Sirius in its rising. Others mirrored Orion's belt at a precise angle during solstice. A few were said to reveal stars that no longer exist in our sky, lost to cosmic drift, but preserved faintly in the ritual of water. The priests believed that when a star's light struck the pool just right, balanced between angle and hour, a kind of portal opened. Not one of travel, but of remembrance. They called it the veil of water, and they believed that beneath it, for a breath or two, time collapsed. Past, future, now all curled together like ripples on a moonlit pond. One priestess, her name remembered only in fragments, was said to spend her nights beside the largest of these pools. She spoke little, wrote nothing, and lived apart from the ritual life of the temple. But those who passed her at dusk said her eyes reflected more than flame. They reflected sky. When asked why she came to the pool each night, she answered simply, to be seen by the stars. Because in Heliopolis, looking was never one-sided. To gaze upon the cosmos was to invite it to gaze back. They believed that the reflections in those pools were not just images. They were messages, not always in words, not always clear, but in feeling, in rhythm, in sudden stillness where once there was unease. A flicker in the water that mirrored the flicker in the heart. The pools, though shallow, held depth beyond measure. They were often circled with low walls, smooth, warm to the touch, where one could sit cross-legged and observe, not the stars themselves, but the way the stars moved in water. It was said that in reflection, truth revealed itself not in sharpness, but in distortion. Because in water, everything trembled, everything danced, and sometimes that was how the message came. Not in clarity, but in shimmer. Perhaps that is still true. Perhaps, even now, we find truth not in what stands still, but in what moves with grace, in what reflects us not perfectly but gently. Today, the sacred pools are gone, cracked, filled with dust and debris, their alignments forgotten, their silence broken, and yet water remains, and stars remain, and stillness remains. And when the world grows quiet, when light falls gently on your ceiling or your eyelids or the inside of your breath, perhaps you too become a mirror, a soft, dark pool where something above, something vast and wordless, comes close enough to touch. So rest now. Let the surface of your thoughts still. Let the ripples fade, and look not upward but inward. For once long ago, there was a city that caught the sky in its hands, and in its still water, the heavens remembered themselves. Every breath of Heliopolis was cast in gold. It shimmered in obelisks. It echoed through courtyards. It bloomed each morning with the rising of RA. But beneath that golden rhythm, beneath the rituals, beneath the stones and prayers and well-balanced silence, there was something older, something darker, something that slithered. The priests knew his name. They whispered it only at dusk. Apep, also called Apophis, the coiling serpent of the Duat, the endless night. He was not a devil, not a demon. He was chaos, pure, formless, and eternal. He was uncreation. And every night, as R.A. descended into the underworld, sailing his solar bark through the 12 hours of darkness, Apep would rise, not to defeat, but to challenge. This was the hidden battle at the heart of the cosmos. The sun god, keeper of balance, versus the serpent, embodiment of the deep unknown. And the priests of Heliopolis understood that this myth was not a story. It was a cycle, a necessity, because without Apep, there would be no need for Ma'at. No need for balance, for structure, for prayer. Order only exists in the face of what lies beyond it. And so, they did not hate the serpent. They watched him, beneath the great temple complex, beneath the very axis where the Benben stone once stood. There was said to be a series of subterranean chambers, narrow, winding, damp with ancient air. Few entered them. Even fewer returned with words. These were the veins of the serpent, a symbolic descent into the realm beneath order. Not a punishment, a practice. A priest would enter alone, holding only a single oil lamp, not to conquer darkness, but to sit with it, to feel the weight of what cannot be controlled, to hear the silence that is not peaceful, but trembling. They believed that facing Apep was part of serving RA, that one must know what threatens the light, to truly protect it. It is said that the air in those tunnels changed the deeper you went, that the walls themselves seemed to curve, though no architect had planned them to. That sound echoed back with just enough delay to make you question if it was your own. And at the end of one path, there was a carved chamber, small, circular there. No hieroglyphs, no offering tables, just a single stone seat, and on the wall above it, etched faintly, face what coils beneath you. There the priest would sit, lamp flickering, surrounded by quiet too deep to describe. Some stayed for minutes, some for hours. Some emerged pale, trembling, unsure of time. Others came back smiling, because what they discovered was this. Apep does not attack in rage. He waits. He waits in the doubts we do not speak, in the parts of ourselves we fear, in the moments just before sleep, when our thoughts begin to stretch too far, and the familiar begins to bend. He waits not to strike, but to be acknowledged, because light without shadow is not true light. It is illusion, and in Heliopolis, they made room for the real. Each morning, when RA rose again, the people did not cheer as though nothing had happened. They gave thanks, because the sun's return was never guaranteed. It was earned, and deep within the silence of the temple, the priest who had faced the serpent beneath would kneel, place both palms on the earth, and whisper not to RA, but to Apep, "Thank you for the test. Today, we banish darkness from our homes, flood our nights with false light, run from stillness. But still, Apep coils beneath us, in our fears, in our restlessness, in our forgetting. And maybe that's all right. Maybe he is not here to destroy us, but to remind us that every light we carry, every act of grace, of courage, of kindness, only shines because it chooses to, again and again, against the dark. So sleep now. Let the shadows stretch. Let the quiet deepen. Let the serpent wind through the roots of your dreams, not to consume, but to cradle. Because once, long ago, in a city built on light, the darkness was not locked away. It was faced, it was honored, and it was never, ever forgotten. Heliopolis is gone. That is what you'll be told. That the city of the sun was swallowed by time. That its temples crumbled. That its priests vanished. That its name lives only in books and beneath layers of modern streets. And in a way, it's true. The columns no longer rise. The chants no longer echo. The pools no longer shimmer with starlight. But look closer. Step carefully. and you will find that the sand remembers. Beneath the concrete sprawl of Mataria, now a bustling district on the edge of Cairo, beneath apartment blocks and fruit stands, beneath the motorbike engines and cell phone towers, the bones of Yinu still sleep. The last obelisk still stands there, alone, tall and silent, encircled by a fence, watched by no crowds. It leans slightly now, its base weathered, its inscriptions softened by centuries of sun and silence, but is still there. The same pillar that once caught the first light of RA. The same granite finger that pointed each morning toward memory, toward meaning. And beneath it, scattered through the soil like forgotten verses, lie fragments, lintels, shrines, slabs of polished stone with faint glyphs. Occasionally, a statue's broken face, its expression half erased, yet still alive. Archaeologists call them debris, dust of dynasties. But in truth, they're not lost. They are waiting, because in Heliopolis, the sacred was not in what was built, but in what was meant. An intention lingers. A stone placed to catch the solstice sun still carries that memory, even if buried beneath a parking lot. A corridor aligned with Sirius still holds that purpose, even if no footsteps echo within it. In recent years, excavation teams have begun to unearth strange alignments, foundations where none should be, pillars that mark the path of long-forgotten stars. They have uncovered parts of the temple of Ariadne, buried deep, layered beneath not just sand, but centuries of silence, and in the soil around it. They find things that don't quite make sense, carvings that seem more worn than their material suggests, shards of painted pottery with pigments no longer used in known eras, even stones that appear to have been moved long after the city was abandoned. And sometimes, in the early hours of morning, when the dig sites are quiet, when the workers have not yet arrived, some say they hear it. A tone, low, gentle, not music exactly, not wind, just presence, a humming beneath the feet, as if the earth itself were trying to speak through the soles of your shoes. Some dismiss it as imagination. Some record it and find nothing. But a few smile and say softly, Heliopolis remembers. Because the sands here are not empty. They are layered with memory. Each grain a story. Each shift a whisper. Each gust of wind a breath from a city that refuses to die. Children play atop forgotten temples. Mothers sweep dust from streets where gods once walked. Sparrows land on obelisks that have seen more sunrises than any I can count. And all of it lives in the same air. All of it remembers. Because sacredness is not erased by time. It is only made quiet. So tonight, as you rest in your own corner of the world, miles from Mataria, hours from any ancient stone, know this. The past is not gone. It is beneath you. It is within you. And sometimes, in dreams or stillness, you may feel it stir. A pressure behind your ribs. A warmth in the soles of your feet. A wordless familiarity when you touch earth. When you close your eyes and listen. That is the city of the sun. It has not vanished. It has only changed its shape. So sleep now. Let the weight of history hold you like warm sand. Let the hush of memory become your lullaby. And know, once long ago, there was a city that spoke to the stars. And though its voice has faded, the sands have not forgotten. Stone. To us now it is weight. Obstacle. Inert. But to the builders of Heliopolis, stone was alive. It did not move. It did not speak. But it listened. It absorbed. And it remembered. The priests believed that every block of granite, every slab of limestone, every polished surface of alabaster, held something deeper than density. It held light. Not the kind that shines or blinds. Not sunlight or firelight. But a quieter, slower light, the kind that moves through time, the kind that waits. They called it Akti, or the radiant spirit in matter, a presence, not just in humans, not just in gods, but in material itself. To the builders of Heliopolis, a block of stone was not merely shaped. It was awakened. From a moment it was pulled from the quarry, dragged across earth and sweat and fire. It was sung to. It was bathed. It was aligned with the rising of Ra, because it was not being turned into a temple. It was returning to its purpose. Some believed that granite came from the bones of the gods. That alabaster was frozen moonlight. That quartz, when it caught the sun just right, didn't reflect the light. It released it. They used these stones not just for beauty, but for memory. Not memory as we know it, not facts, not data, but resonance. A chamber built with black basalt would absorb heat during the day and return it slowly through the night, mimicking the sun's hidden journey beneath the world. A floor paved with white limestone would catch the sunrise like a slow exhale, warming the feet of those who walked barefoot into morning prayer. A pillar etched with shallow glyphs would shift in appearance throughout the day, not because of the carving, but because of the light that passed through it like breath through lungs. They believed that certain stones could carry the frequency of a voice, that if a priest spoke truth in a room lined with sacred granite, the walls would hold it, that centuries later, that same frequency might return, not as sound, but as a shiver in the bones of someone who walked there again. There are stories, quiet, uncertain, of explorers standing in the ruins of Heliopolis, placing their palms on warm, sunlit walls, and feeling something press back, not forcefully, not with pain, just recognition, as if the stone knew, as if it remembered what had once passed through it. We're not built like this now. We chase speed, efficiency. We bind steel and concrete not to spirit, but to deadline. But in Heliopolis, every stone was a listener. Every wall, a vessel. Every threshold, a place where two worlds, material and eternal, touched. They say that one temple chamber, now collapsed, was once constructed entirely of rose quartz. That in the hour before sunset, the entire room would blush softly with inner light, as if the walls were exhaling something too beautiful for words. And those who entered in that hour, just before darkness, often wept, not because they saw something, but because they felt remembered, as if the stone itself knew their name. Perhaps it is not so strange. We speak often of places that feel alive, of rooms that remember, of ruins that hold something. Perhaps it is not the past that lingers, but the light within the stone that has not yet finished telling its story. So tonight, as you lay your head down, imagine stone not as cold, not as dead, but as warm and dreaming. Imagine your bed carved from granite pulled from beneath a temple. Imagine your bones aligning softly with the memory of the earth. Imagine your breath matching the slow rhythm of light still sleeping in the walls around you. And know that nothing built with reverence ever truly disappears. It simply waits. Like stone, like silence, like the light that sleeps beneath your ribs. For once long ago, in a city that bowed to the sun, the walls themselves were alive, and they have not stopped listening. In Heliopolis, the air was not empty. It was sacred. Every beam of sunlight, every breath that passed through the corridors of the temple, was alive with sound unseen. Not sound in the way we now know it. Not the chatter of markets or the hollow clang of distant bells, but spoken offerings, chants, whispers born not from want, but from knowing. The priests called it Neter Shetep, the appeased voice. The voice that had been aligned, prepared, made worthy to enter the space between this world and the next. In the great courtyards at dawn, in perfect unison, White-robed figures stood beneath the rising sun and let words rise with it. Not to beg, not to impress, but to balance. Because in Heliopolis, sound was not just a vibration. It was geometry. It moved in spirals. It clung to stone, and it left trails in the air, lines of gold, invisible to the eye, but sometimes visible in the dust. You see, the priest believed that when a word was spoken with pure intention, the particles in the air, tiny grains of sunlit matter, would shift around it, catching the sound, holding aloft. And if you stood in the right shaft of sunlight, if the dust swirled just so, you might see it. A faint spiral, a shimmer, a dance. They said that dust was not dirt. It was memory made visible. Every fleck a fragment of ash from a burnt offering, a breath from a priest long past, a piece of a leaf that had once cast shade over a temple wall. It carried the past, and sound activated it. There are records, rare, mostly forgotten, of ceremonial rooms swept not clean, but precisely disturbed. Rooms where sand and dust were scattered carefully across the floor. Then, priests would stand at each corner, face inward, and speak. Not loudly, not always in words, sometimes only in hums, in the slow resonance of vowels stretched across breath and time. And when they finished, they would kneel and watch the dust. It moved, not like wind, not like draft, but with purpose, as if the particles had heard something sacred and were shifting into shape. Some formed rings, others faint lines that curved toward a central point, as if the sound had carved paths in the air. They believed these shapes to be signs, responses, proof that their voices had been received, not by gods, but by the balance itself. Because in Heliopolis, ritual was not about asking. It was about remembering the right shape of things. And the voice, when aligned, when humble, when true, could help restore it. Even individual names, when spoken in ceremony, were never said plainly. They were sung, softly elongated into their root sounds, as if the person's essence could be drawn out like thread, woven gently back into the world's fabric. Some rooms had acoustics so perfect that one note, held properly, could resonate for minutes. They called these places golden chambers, not because they were painted or adorned, many were not, but because the sound inside them shimmered like gold held to flame. It is said that some initiates spent their entire novitiate in silence, not because they lacked wisdom, but because they were learning to not waste sound. Because every word spoken without need was like dust scattered too soon. Once gone, it could not return. And perhaps that is why the old words still linger in the air of Heliopolis. Even now, some archaeologists working in Materia report strange sensations. A tingling when they speak aloud, a heaviness in the voice that was not there before. One described speaking the name of RA at the base of the old obelisk and hearing something answer, not as echo, but as presence. And perhaps they are right. Perhaps the dust still holds it. The voices of 1,000 mornings. The low chants beneath endless suns. The names whispered in gold and silence. So sleep now. Let your thoughts drift like dust in golden light. Let the air around you grow soft. Let each breath be a spiral, rising slowly, curling back inward. And if a word comes to you in that quiet, do not speak it too quickly. Let warm on your tongue. Let hum in your ribs. Let become sacred again. For once long ago, in a city built of stone and sky, words were not thrown into the air. They were carried by light, and dust was listening. There is a moment before sunrise that is not night, and not yet day. It lingers like a hell breath, a space between heartbeats, a hush so complete it softens the world to stillness. The ancients of Heliopolis knew this moment well. They built their entire world around it. To them, the sun was not simply a light that rose. It was a being who crossed a threshold. Every morning, every lifetime, they called that threshold decay, the horizon. Not just a place in the sky, but a door. And at that doorway, the sun did not leap. He emerged, carefully, slowly, with ceremony. And so, each morning, before the first glow lit the eastern edge of the city, before birds stirred, before even the priests began to chant, one figure stood in stillness, the keeper of the threshold. She was chosen not for age or rank, but for quiet. Her task was not to summon the sun, but to witness its return. Wrapped in linen the color of shadow, she would walk barefoot to the edge of the temple's eastern platform, a smooth stretch of white limestone that faced the unseen. And she would stand there, alone, as the world waited. Behind her, the city held its breath. Ahead of her, darkness began to thin. It was not yet sunrise. That would come later, with trumpets and chants and the warming of stone. This was the doorway between days. And in this hush, the keeper would raise both palms, not to speak, not to beckon, but to offer stillness. Because in Heliopolis, it was believed that the sun did not return because of worship, but because someone was listening. It was a relationship, a rhythm, a vow, and that vow could only be honored in silence. They believed that within the decay, time was soft, not linear, not fixed. Just for a moment, everything could begin again. Wounds could fade, names could be unspoken, futures could tilt gently in a new direction. Because this space, this seam between darkness and light, was open. And in that openness, the gods moved. Ra's first light was not seen, but felt. A warmth behind the ribs, a softening in the knees, a tremble in the stones beneath the feet. And when it came, the keeper would kneel, not because of submission, but because something larger had arrived. Not louder, just larger. The city would then stir. The priests would begin their chants. The offerings would burn. But that first moment, that whisper-thin breath between dark and gold, was sacred in a way no ritual could match. And they guarded it, not with walls, but with care. Even today, the horizon behind Materia still glows before the sun itself appears. A faint blush across the rooftops, a golden hush across forgotten stones. And maybe if you are up early enough, if the world has not yet found its voice, you can stand still and feel it. That pause, that openness, that doorway. And you may remember something you never knew you forgot. So sleep now. Let this day end. Let your thoughts fall quiet. And let the next one begin not with noise, but with listening. Because once, long ago, in a city built for light, the day did not begin when the sun rose. It began the moment someone was quiet enough to meet it at the door. In the stories we tell now, ancient Egypt gleams. We imagine crowns and chalices, tombs encrusted with treasure, kings buried beneath avalanches of gold. And it's true, gold was sacred. But in Heliopolis, not all gold was made to shine. There was another kind, a quieter kind, a weightless kind, gold that was not forged but felt. It lived in breath, in the warmth behind the eyes when a truth was spoken, in the echo of a vow never broken. They called it Nebare, the gold of Ra, but not the kind that could be touched, not the metal, not the coin, not the mask. It was a light that lived inside a thing, and only revealed itself when that thing fulfilled its sacred purpose. A word spoken at the exact right moment. That was gold. A bowl that held water, so still it reflected the stars perfectly. Gold. A step taken without fear, in alignment with Ma'at. Gold. This gold did not glitter. It glowed. not outward, inward. And only those who had slowed their eyes, their breath, their wanting could see it. The priests of Heliopolis trained not only in astronomy or recitation, but in perception. They were taught to close their eyes in the golden hour, stand barefoot on sun-warmed stone, and sense, without sight, where the true gold lived. Sometimes it was in the stone itself, sometimes in a gesture, sometimes in silence. There is a story, faint and unconfirmed, of a young initiate who wandered the outer temple, eyes downcast, tasked with observing that which does not ask to be seen. He walked past sculptures, ignored jewels, overlooked ornate carvings. But when he reached a broken step near the edge of the courtyard, chipped, unmarked, nearly forgotten, he knelt. And he whispered, "Here it is." The elder priests watched, and they nodded, because that step, it said, had been untouched for 1,000 mornings. But it was the first stone touched by light at the solstice. And though it bore no symbol, though it held no decoration, it held the turning of time. That was Nebare, the gold that doesn't shine. Not all gold was meant to be seen. Some was meant to be carried, in the weight of truth, in the warmth of memory, in the softness of a hand reaching for another without pride. They believed this inner gold could collect in the soul, that with each act of integrity, of courage, of clarity, a person began to glow, not in body, but in presence. The most radiant among them were said to enter a room without being noticed. But once they left, everything felt different. The air clearer, the silence deeper, the light somehow warmer. And perhaps you've known someone like that. Someone who did not impress you with brilliance, but remained with you, quietly, like warmth on stone after sunset. That is the gold of Heliopolis. Not wealth, not shine, but essence. And even the gods, it said, were judged by this unseen gleam. When R.A. passed through the Duet each night, when he faced a pep and navigated the waters of the unknown, it was not his crown that protected him. It was his Nebare, his inner gold, his unwavering alignment with purpose, his light that refused to flicker, even when swallowed by shadow. And when he rose again each morning, the world did not cheer his return because he had survived. They rejoiced because he had remained himself. So tonight, rest not as one seeking brilliance, but as one who is already glowing. Let your thoughts settle like dust on gold. Let your spirit become heavy, not with burden, but with worth. Because once long ago, in a city that worshipped the sun, they knew that not all light shines. Some glows, soft and constant, in the quiet center of who you are. And that is the gold that never fades. In a city of carved names, of golden inscriptions, of gods whose stories wove through stone and sky, there was, they say, one structure that bore nothing. No glyphs, no banners, no offering tables. It was called by those who barely dared speak of it, the temple without a name. It stood at the farthest eastern edge of Heliopolis, beyond the sacred pools, beyond the main temples of Ra and Adam, beyond even the path of the obelisks. And it was small, not grand, not towering, not impressive by any eye trained to seek majesty. Its walls were made not of polished limestone, but of dark granite, unadorned, rough, quiet. Its door was low. You had to bow to enter. Inside there was nothing. No statue, no flame, no altar, only space, stillness, and silence. But this was no accident. This was the point. Because in Heliopolis, it was understood, rarely taught, never written, that beyond the gods we named, beyond Ra and Maat and Thoth, there was something greater, not a being, not a creator, not even a presence, but a vastness, an origin too deep for symbol, too pure for story. And so they build a temple not to glorify it, but to honor its namelessness. The high priests who entered this space did so barefoot and in silence. Before they stepped inside, they fasted, not from food, but from speech. No words were spoken for 3 days prior, not even in thought, if they could manage it, because the temple without a name was not a place to speak. It was a place to unspeak, to let go of all titles, all roles, all assumptions of the divine. Here, the breath became prayer, the heartbeat became chant, and the empty space between footsteps became the sacred text. There is a forgotten passage in a crumbling scroll, tucked deep within the remnants of a temple archive, that reads, "Where there is no name, there is no fear. Where there is no shape, there is no doubt. Where there is no sound, the soul remembers." They believed this temple was the womb of knowing, not because it gave answers, but because it dissolved the questions. Many who entered wept without knowing why, not because they saw something, but because for the first time they didn't have to. The body softened, the breath deepened, and the heart let go of its grip on definition. They left not enlightened, but emptied, and in that emptiness, they said, was the truest form of connection. Some believe the temple had once been older than Heliopolis itself, that the city had been built around it, as if protecting a forgotten truth no one dared erase. Others said it was built by a single architect, a woman whose name was never recorded, that she carved it not to honor gods, but to give them rest, that even the divine needs a space without expectation. And perhaps so do we. Today, no ruins remain of this structure, no marker, no stones, nothing official, but wander far enough through the modern streets of Madaria, away from a noise, beyond the edges of maps, and you may stumble into a courtyard that feels different, not holy, not haunted, just still, and your breath may slow, and your eyes may close, and your name may feel less important. That is how you know you found it. Not a temple of worship, but a temple of release. So tonight, let yourself enter. Let go of the name you've carried all day. The roles, the striving, the noise. Breathe deeply into the dark and know that something vast watches over you. Not as God, not as law, but as silence that loves you without needing to speak. Because once long ago, in a city that spoke to the stars, they built one place that spoke to nothing. And in that nothing, they found everything. In the golden city of Heliopolis, so much was remembered. The path of the sun, the breath of Ma'at, the sacred alignments of stone and star, the voice of water, the rhythm of becoming. But for all that was preserved, in granite, in prayer, in bloodline and shadow, some things were lost. Some stories were whispered once, then swallowed by silence. Some gods, once loved, were allowed to slip into darkness, not with shame, not with violence, but with grace, because the ancients of Heliopolis understood what we so often fear. That forgetting can be sacred too. They believed that the stars themselves once held stories we no longer know. Constellations that marked myths now vanished. Gods who never found temples, but were still real. For a time, for a people, for a breath of history too quiet to endure. They called them the sleeping ones. Gods whose names no longer appear in any scroll, but who once walked the dream lives of seers and sages. You will not find them in the carvings. They were never carved. They were sung. And when the song was no longer needed, it was released, like smoke through fingers, like tears into sand. There are records, fragmented, brittle, barely legible, of rituals performed beneath a wandering star with no name, of prayers offered to the silence that falls after all the others have been named. One glyph appears only once in all surviving Heliopolitan material. A half-sun wrapped in reeds. No translation survives. No god is tied to it. And yet, in certain temple ruins, it reappears faintly, carved into the underside of stones, as if left for the ground itself to remember. Archaeologists call these things anomalies, mistakes, coincidence, but some say they are marks of farewell, echoes of things the world was not meant to carry forward, not because they weren't worthy, but because their purpose was complete. You see, in Heliopolis, eternity was not measured in permanence. It was measured in rightness. A god served its time. A myth did its work. A truth passed through the people like the sun through the sky. And when it was done, it bowed. It left, and the people let it go. They did not fear forgetting. They feared clinging. To speak a name too long after its light had faded was to trap the soul of a thing, to keep it from resting, to dishonor its movement into the silence that birthed all stories. And so, even the stars were allowed to vanish. Some stars once revered in Heliopolis no longer grace our sky. They slip beyond sight, consumed by time, or by the shifting of the Earth's great tilt. And the myths tied to them faded too, not in anger, but in trust, because the people believed if something is truly needed, it will return, not in the same shape, not with the same name, but in a dream, in a voice, in a silence that tugs at the soul and says, "You've heard this before." And maybe you have. Maybe, in a dream, you walked a road you've never seen and felt strangely safe. Maybe a symbol once passed your eyes and stirred something inside you, something like grief, but also like home. That is how the forgotten speak, not in volume, but in recognition. They wait at the edges of thought, not to be worshipped, but to be felt, to remind us that the sacred is not only what we remember, but also what we once knew and chose, quietly, beautifully, to release. So tonight, as your thoughts grow soft and the stars above you settle into their ancient patterns, know this. Some stories are not meant to last. Some names are not meant to be spoken again. Some lights are meant to go out, so that others may shine. Let go now of the need to know, of the need to name, of the ache to preserve. Let your soul become wide enough for silence, wide enough to receive what the stars forgot. Because once long ago, in a city that listened as much as it spoke, they understood. To forget with love is also a form of worship. We have walked the corridors. We have stood beneath the obelisks. We have wandered the labyrinth, listened to echoes in chambers of stillness, watched stars drift across pools no longer filled with water. We have remembered, and still, after all this, there is something more. A presence not found in myth, not caught in story, not carved in stone, but felt softly beneath everything. A hum, a warmth, a breath. Because Heliopolis is not gone. Not truly. Its temples may lie in fragments. Its chants long silenced. Its gods hidden in the folds of time. But the rhythm of it, the pulse, the breath, it's still here. In dust that rises at dawn over Materia. In light that touches stone, just for a moment, in the same golden angle it did 3,000 years ago, in the quiet between traffic, in the shadow cast by the last standing obelisk, still leaning slightly, still catching sunrise like a patient hand held up to greet a returning friend. They say the priests of Heliopolis believe that breath was the first act of creation. That before Ra spoke the world into form, he inhaled, and in that breath, the silence turned inward and knew itself. That is what this city was built upon. Not power, not rule, but inhalation, a deep, sacred intake of presence. And that breath still moves, You can feel in your chest right now. If you pause, if you listen not for words, but for space, the breath is not just in the ruins. It is in you. Because every time you choose silence over noise, wonder over certainty, depth over speed, you're walking through Heliopolis again. You're stepping barefoot on temple floors long buried. You're standing at the doorway between days, offering nothing but presence, and being answered by light. It breathes in the way you fall asleep, not because you're tired, but because you trust the night. It breathes in how you look at the stars and feel not small, but remembered. It breathes in the softness that comes when you stop trying to understand and simply feel. And in this final moment, this last slow turn before dream takes you fully. Know this. You carry the city now, in your stillness, in your breath, in the dust that glows in sunlight through your window. Heliopolis is not a ruin. It is a rhythm, and rhythms do not die. They pause, they wait, they return. So rest now. Let everything fall away. The stories, the gods, the names. And hold only this. Stillness, light, and the breath beneath all things. For once, long ago, there was a city that spoke to the stars. And though its voice has faded, it breathes in you still.